Hello, how are you doing? I had quite a strange dream last night that involved Ali Smith, where I was having a conversation with her about dreams, where we were talking about the stories we create in our dreams and how those stories interact or don't interact with the stories we make about the days that we live and sort of recounting the day that we've just had, which sounds all quite like pretentious as a sort of subject matter of like of a dream of having a conversation, and also like a bit meta about like having a dream talking about dreams. And within that I was like struggling to try to remember dreams that I'd had in the past. But I don't know, I find sometimes I'll have like dreams that involve Ali Smith or like our other authors whose books I've read a lot of, because I don't know if you ever have this sense where you feel like you've read so many books by an author, you have such a strong sense about the sensibility of that author themselves, like not just the subject matter of their book, but the way that they sort of think. And so it's like almost like you can have a conversation with them. Has that ever happened to you? Anyway, that was just like a funny thing that happened to me last night. So I'm going to talk about the books I read over the month of June, and I had a really excellent reading month. I read 12 books in total, most of them novels, some of them contemporary set novels, some of them historical novels. I also read a collection of short stories and a memoir, and so yeah, a really great reading month. Most of them really excellent books. There was only one book which was, I mean, it wasn't a dud, but it wasn't as good as I was hoping or expecting it would be, or at least I didn't enjoy it as much as I was quite expecting to. But yeah, there's quite a lot to talk about, so I'm going to try to be brief. I'm going to aim for brevity in talking about all these different books. First off is Assemby by Natasha Brown, and I almost included this in my favorite books of the year so far list, but I'm in the process of rereading it, and I wanted to take some more time with the story because it is such a brief novel. It's only 100 pages long, and so when I first read it, I read it fairly quickly because it is so short, but also is really gripping, and I wanted to know what was going to happen. But her prose is so rich and poetic, and there's a lot of hidden meaning in it. I think it's worth taking the time to read it slowly and to take it all in. And so now I'm doing that again, or I'm doing that now that I'm rereading it. And so the story is about a young Black British woman who works in the financial sector, and the title Assembly has a couple of different meanings. So she goes to assemblies of students to talk about all of the opportunities for young people today, especially Black young British people in the country today, and but how she doesn't necessarily believe in what she's talking about, or at least there's a much more complicated sense she has about this experience than what she's relaying in these overtly positive messages. And so she's contemplating the ramifications of what it means to be Black in Britain today, but also the Assembly refers to a family get-together that she's going to for her white male partner, who comes from quite a privileged English family, and going to their stately home in the country for this big soiree, and all of the feelings attendant for that, of feeling an outsider, and she has being made to feel like an outsider, and also she has a medical condition which is becoming more pressing, and she has to make a decision about that. So it's following that storyline, and yeah, and her prose is so poetic and beautiful, and really, but not in a sort of pretentious way, but really expressing and encapsulating this experience that she feels. And the writer Olivia Sujic describes this book as Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway meets Citizen, and I can't sort of get that description out of my head because it feels like it is exactly that. It's Claudine Rankin's sort of sensibility with also kind of the prose style of Virginia Woolf, and it just marries those two things to make this style of writing that's so impactful. And so yeah, I'm taking my time rereading this, and I'm gonna have more thoughts about it. The Performance by Claire Thomas, and this is a novel that I talked about in my favorite books of the year so far, but I didn't talk about it all that much. And so it's the story of three different women who are all at very different stages of their lives that are going to see a production of Samuel Beckett's play Happy Days in an Australian theatre while a bushfire is occurring outside the theatre, like not immediately outside the theatre, but like it's in, you know, the area. And so everyone in the theatre is very much aware that this is occurring, and, you know, this thing is happening outside, which is having disastrous consequences. And so it's this big, larger sort of environmental and worldly crisis that's happening outside, while inside they're having these very interiorized experiences, contemplating their lives, and most of them are sort of at a crisis point in their personal lives as well. And so it's that personal and then the larger, like, political things that are happening in the world. But what's so wonderful about this is it mimics the actual experience of going to a theater. And you know how when we go to theater performances, we are concentrating, or at least trying to concentrate, about what's happening on the stage in front of us, but more often where we will lapse into thinking about our memories or our past, or things that are going on in our lives, or little things that are happening in the theater, of like somebody opening a sweet packet and the noise of that, or an audience member snoring near us, and dealing with that. And that's what I think makes this novel so like playful and fun and engaging, but also it's so artful in the way it's structured, in going between the different women's perspectives. But then when we get to the intermission of Samuel Beckett's play, the intermission is set out like a play script, where the women are having these conversations and interacting with each other, and I thought that was just so fun, and like such a creative way of like showing the experience of going to a theater and then making it into a novel and writing a story about it in that way. And so yeah, I think this is an incredible novel. Then I read The Other Black Girl by Zakiya Dahlia Harris, and this novel is so interesting in that it is shaped sort of like a generic thriller, but has a real strong social message behind it. And I wasn't sure at first if that was gonna work, but by the novel's end, like, it did really work for me, and I thought it was really powerful in its message. So it's the story of a young black woman that works in a publishing company in New York, and the novel begins when another young black woman joins the company, and so there's this sense of camaraderie between them, but also a slight competitiveness. And so it goes through that, but then it feels like there's unsettling things happening in the background, and you get more of a sense of this paranoia that she's feeling, which turns into a conspiracy theory, and then that conspiracy theory is shown to be true, and I wasn't so sure about that at first, because it felt like oh well, this is getting like slightly ridiculous and over amplifying this storyline. But then it really like hit home for me, and showed how all the microaggressions that she feels working in this environment build up over time into this much bigger sense of the compromises that she has to make, and the price of assimilation into a lifestyle and a way of presenting oneself, and a self-consciousness one has in daily life. And I thought it was so effective at the end, how it brings this all together, looking at both the past and the history of there's a character from that used to work at this publishing company, and what happened to her in the meantime, and a famous black author that was published by this company, and so at the end I felt like it was both really gripping, but also quite meaningful. And I mean, this novel has been compared so much to the film Get Out, and I mean, it's a completely apt comparison because it does exactly that in delivering this wild story that also has a much deeper meaning. Heaven by Mieko Kawakami, and it's translated by Sam Bett and David Boyd. And this novel is so heartbreaking. It's the story of an adolescent boy and an adolescent girl who are sort of the outcasts in their class, and they are constantly, ruthlessly, horribly bullied by people in their school. And it follows mainly the story from the point of view of the boy, who's nicknamed Eyes because he has a slight way, he's slightly cross-eyed, and so people really pick on him for that. And it's, so it is really a heartbreaking story in that way, but it's really looking at the consequences of those actions. And you know how we have all these positive messages saying like, oh, you should just like be who you are and be proud of who you are. And I think it's one thing to intellectually like tell yourself that, but then actually thinking about the meaning and the consequences of being relentlessly persecuted like this when you're growing up, and the damage that does to that, and what is the truth of this experience, of these interactions we have. What does it really say about both ourselves and the people around us and our place in society? And I think it's so clever how this novel interrogates that from different perspectives of both the boys and the girls, because they have they form this kinship with each other in their outcast sense, but have very different points of view and interpretations of what's happening around them. And she shows the consequences that through the drama of the story. And so I think it's really effective and moving, looking at this issue to do with bullying and the trauma that causes. Cathedral by Ben Hopkins, and this is set in the 12th and 13th centuries in a fictional German city, all centered around the construction of a cathedral that the local bishop is commissioning, and the enormous amount of complications around trying to create such a structure, and the enormous cost around creating such a structure. And it follows a number of characters involved in its construction, but it's not so much about the cathedral itself, but about the many different storylines and political goings-ons of a number of different characters that it's following, and mainly follows two brothers and a sister who come from quite a humble farming family, and then sort of work their way up in the world, and following their stories going forward, as well as the treasurer of the bishop as he's trying to get funds to create this cathedral, which he hates the idea of and doesn't want to be done, but he sort of has to because it's the will of the bishop. And it is so thrilling and dynamic, following their stories over time, and it introduces a whole range and cast of characters. It is quite a complicated story. I had to quite concentrate on it quite a lot, and it's quite a long book. It's over 600 pages long, and so I do wish that there was a character list at the beginning of the novel, because I think that would really help understand and keep track of all of the characters in the book. But the way this story gets at the changing politics and economy of that time in history is so fascinating, and so it gives this overall sense of that, as well as the very gripping and complicated stories of the individual characters involved in a number of different dramas that take place over time, like over the course of a century. And yeah, so it's really thrilling and fascinating in that way, and I just enjoyed this so much. The Promise by Damon Galgut, and I already made a video where I spent almost half an hour talking about this book, because I think there's a lot to unpack in it, and it's a really really fascinating novel, and it's one I'm still mulling over and thinking about and trying to make my mind up about. And so I think it is so thought-provoking in that way, as it follows a white South African family as their gradual demise over time, as it follows the funerals of 4 different members of that family over time, and the overall message that makes about the perspective that this family and this sensibility is sort of trapped in is quite powerful and moving. And so yeah, it's a novel that I'm still continuing to think about. I also meant to say I happened to read 2 books that have an E.M. Forster connection with them today, even though they're very different books from each other and don't really have anything to do with each other otherwise, other than this E.M. Forster connection. It's just one of those things of these coincidences you have over the course of reading like very different books, and you can find these surprising connections between them. So in Damon Galgut, it's structured in a way like the novel Howard's End, or at least the premise of the story is like E.M. Forster's novel Howard's End. And Sarah Winman's novel Still Life has this more direct E.M. Forster connection, in that the beginning of the novel we meet an older woman who knew, or at least encountered, E.M. Forster when she was younger and first came to Florence. And so she's an art historian, and she meets a young British soldier in Florence during the war, and they have this connection with each other, which then sticks with both of them. It goes on to follow their different paths of their lives until they eventually come back together. And I find something so endearing about stories that center around intergenerational friendships. I just love those kind of connections between an older person and a younger person, where it's not so much a sort of like the older person is teaching the younger person kind of relationship, but it's a more sincere connection across generations, which really sort of obliterates age in a way, and I think shows these really like tender connections we can have with each other outside our respective peer groups, or what are our expected peer groups that will just naturally be friends with people that are our own age. Like sometimes we can have these wonderful friendships with people that are very different ages from us, and I think it's so beautiful how it shows that. But at the same time, I felt like there was something about, and I think this is something about Sarah Winman's style of writing, in that I find slightly whimsical and kind of distances me a bit from the characters. So the main characters in this I did grow quite fond of, but there's a lot of peripheral characters that I never felt too strong a connection with, and they just never really completely clicked for me. And so I think it is really interesting how this story looks at history from the perspective of really unconventional people that you don't often see in historical fiction or fiction from that time period. And so it reminds you how there are people that have lived very different kinds of lives from the kinds we read about in history books, or when we sort of think back on particular periods of time. So it's looking at this sort of mid-20th century time and these different characters and their aspirations and ways of living, which are very different from the dominant in that time period. And I thought it was effective how it did that, but at the same time I felt this slight distance from it. And there was, and in particular the character of the parrot in this. I know some people have said they love the parrot in this story, but I felt it was slightly corny how that comes across, and just didn't really work for me. And there's a particular scene when there's very like big dramatic scene which overall is really well done, showing this historical incident when Florence was flooded, and it had a devastating effect and killed a number of people, but also led to the devastation of a lot of artwork and books, because it's a city that's so rich in those things, and they just weren't safeguarded in a way that protected them, and so a lot were destroyed. And yeah, it's very dramatic how it shows that scene, but the parrot is involved in a way which just felt so like corny for me. And every time the parrot will quote Shakespeare sometime, and that just felt like really overdone for me, and a bit cringeworthy, and I just didn't really like that part of it. But what I thought was the most effective thing about this novel was the end, actually, and the final section of it goes back in history to the very beginning of the century and shows one of the characters' early life, and how it does that I thought was so moving and beautifully done and effective. And that's when you get some real interaction with Ian Forster, when you see this when she encounters him, and yeah, and I thought that was really great and really well done, and really effective after going forward through the decades to then go back to this much earlier time period. Yeah, I thought that was great, but overall I enjoyed this. I thought it was good, but yeah, just didn't strike me in the heart in the way that Sarah Winman's novel Tin Man did. Libertie by Kaitlyn Greenidge, and this novel is all about a young black woman named Libertie in the time before and after the American Civil War, and showing how she grows up. She's freeborn and grows up with a mother who has lighter skin than she does, and works as a doctor in their local community. And in the beginning of the novel, she's a sort of tutor to her mother in her medical practice, and her mother has all these aspirations for her that she's gonna grow up and join her in her medical practice. And but then when she sent away to school, she learns that she wants a different things in her life, and she meets people who take her on a different path, including a man from Haiti who is initially studying with her mother, and she gets married to him and moves to Haiti with him, which at the time it was still quite a young nation, and that the Haitian Revolution had happened like 50 or 60 years before that. But I was so glad that I read the biography Black Spartacus recently, which shows a figure from the Haitian Revolution and goes into the history of that, because it gave me a great background for understanding like how difficult it was for the country to try to establish itself in this post-colonial time, and yeah, the real complications of that. And then so to see that from a number of decades afterwards, as the country is still struggling to understand what it's going to do for itself, was really valuable for me, and yeah, gave me a different insight. So I was glad that I had that in this sort of recent knowledge, since I had read that biography last month. And but I don't think you need to know about that to get so much out of this story, because it is quite effective showing this character's evolution as a human, and looking at the issue of liberty from a number of different angles. Like, what does it mean to really be free as a person, and to not just racially in this post Civil War society, but also freed from the expectations of your family and your husband and the larger society. How the power structures in society aren't very easy to overcome, and there will always be imbalances and people taking advantage of their power and people that are being taken advantage of, and I think that shows that in a really dynamic and new way. So it's a really striking and original historical novel. And so I'm going to talk about some of the books for my reading for Pride Month, but a really wonderful, surprising thing was that a number of the novels I happened to read happened to have as a sort of sideline in some of their stories some gay characters and a gay storyline, and all of these books had that. I mean, it's not too surprising in the case of Sarah Winman, after Tin Man, and she often writes about characters, and I think it's so one of the wonderful characters in this is an older well, a number of the different older women in this novel are lesbians, and so it looks at those relationships earlier in the century. But also Ben Hopkins' novel, there's a sort of gay storyline in that, and I think that's really delicately and beautifully done with one of the characters. And it's not like the most prominent thing in either of these novels, but it is like an aspect of the story. And so in Libertie too, there's two female characters that have a relationship with each other, and that's just sort of one sort of small aspect of the story that's happening on the side that you're sort of aware of, and that's also occurring. So yeah, that was a sort of wonderful sort of discovery, and the books that I happened to read in a sort of nice coincidence. But yeah, I really stuck to my TBR, or at least stuck more than I normally do to the TBR that I made for myself this month for Pride Month, in that I read 4 books from my TBR list. And so first off, there's Unicorn by Amrou Al-Kadhi, the memoirs of a Muslim drag queen. And it is so wonderful, this story. I mean, a lot of you responded to my TBR saying like what a great story it is. And yeah, and it is such a moving and heartbreaking, but also a beautiful story, and really intelligent how he tells it and explores his own experience growing up with a very strict Muslim family in Iraq, and this feeling of differences he had. I mean, slightly like endearing things of like how he had a crush on Macaulay Culkin after watching Home Alone and wanted to get married to him, and how he's condemned for that when he tells his family about it. But also, yeah, going into his feelings of alienation and the enormous pressure he put on himself to aspire to a perfection in his scholarly pursuits, when his family made him feel worthless, and that they would really rather he was dead. And with this sense, it gave him this enormous drive to strive for perfection, but not in a healthy way, like in a very manic way, which was so debilitating. And he describes that so vividly, but then also eventually the real wonderful and liberation he finds in starting to do drag, and how this really puts him in touch with his past in a way which he had alienated himself from. So his family moves to England at one point, and he finds opportunities here, but also new constrictions as he goes to the school where a lot of the people are openly racist towards him in quite a shocking way, since this is the fairly recent past, and so I found, I mean, it shouldn't be that surprising, but it was sort of surprising to me that it was still so blatantly expressed, and almost like upheld by the institution, that this is just the way it was, or at least there wasn't a support network for Amrou there. And yeah, that was so striking about it. But also I just love the descriptions in this as Amrou describes these slightly offbeat things where he feels a strong connection with sea life and underwater life and these odd creatures that can be found at the bottom of the ocean. He tries to cultivate these aquariums and gets really into making these aquariums because Amrou feels this connection with sea life in a way that he doesn't with other human beings, and it's this wonderful expression of how there are these aspects to our personality that don't fit in with the larger society, but also how Amrou comes to have this reconciliation with their family and their Muslim culture in a way, and develop this real pride for it in a way which is so moving and beautiful, and so I think this is just a gorgeous book and a wonderful story. I also read Radclyffe Hall's classic novel The Well of Loneliness, which I didn't expect to enjoy this story so much or fall into it as readily as I did. So at the beginning of the novel, there's this privileged English couple who have a child, and they expect their child is going to be a boy, but is born a girl, but they name the child Stephen anyway, and the father has a very strong connection with Stephen growing up, and almost raises him as a boy, and Stephen herself feels herself almost to be like a boy, and at one point that's almost blatantly stated, and so it follows her through her life as she grows up having these very masculine forms of ways of dressing and expressing herself, but also has an attraction for other women, which you see early on when in her adolescence, when there's a sort of buxom maid in that works for their estate that she has this massive crush on, and it's so touching and moving, like seeing that and knowing exactly what she is feeling, but also the confusion that she's having because she's having these very honest feelings, but people are reacting to it in very different ways from how she sort of expects, and so it gives this confused sense, and how she doesn't have a name for what she is over time, and gradually learns that, and she labels herself an invert, which is a very like antiquated expression for being like homosexual or queer, and so yeah, it was quite like surprising coming across that, but also yeah, just following that whole path of this self-discovery, and how even though she's able to find a fulfilling relationship, they aren't able to live a completely fulfilling life because there isn't the societal acceptance, or they're not able to integrate into the larger social scene in the way that they want to because of the prejudice of the time. And so this was first written and published in 1928, and it was really fascinating also reading about the history of this and how this novel was banned at the time it was first published, and there was this sort of newspaper campaign against it, and that led to an official banning of it, and so all copies of it were like destroyed, and it was sold internationally. It wasn't banned in America, but yeah, and you couldn't get it in England for a long time after it was first published. I think until the late 40s it wasn't made available again, and which is like quite shocking to read about, and following the trial of this, and also how the Bloomsbury group tried to get involved in allowing this book to be published, and were defending it, but also how Radclyffe Hall had very definite feelings about that, and her conflicts coming against like E.M. Forster, and again there's E.M. Forster again cropping up in my reading, and yeah, so it was really fascinating reading about the history of this, but also yeah, it's such, and I think a lot of or at least some gay people reading this past have seen this as sort of like a negative representation of homosexual life, and that it has a tragic arc to the story, and so that all homosexuals like lives end in sort of misery. But reading it now, I just see it as a very like honest portrayal of life during that time, and also I think it's like significant to note that this character is only able to have the freedom she does and express herself in the way that she does because she comes from a very privileged background, and so it is quite like a narrow look at this history and people from it, because obviously there were queer people in all different levels of society, but we don't get those stories so much, and those people didn't have the ability to express themselves or the freedom to express themselves to the extent that Stephen does in this novel, because they weren't able to because of the economic restrictions on their lives, and so I think that's like a significant thing about it. But yeah, I overall it was just such a wonderful reading experience, and I really enjoyed it, and yeah, and it sort of reminds me, like reading these queer books, about how there's why the importance of Pride Month and reading about different queer experiences both from the past and current times, because as gay people or queer people this does still have an impact on our lives, and so it made me really reflective about my own experience and past and my complicated feelings about that, but also gives me such a wonderful insight into other kinds of queer experience, and so one book of that is the short story collection 100 Boyfriends by Brontez, Purnell, and these stories are so wildly sexual, and the writer Denez Smith said, "I love this slut of the book," and it is so slutty. It describes so many casual sexual experiences with many different kinds of men, and how sometimes those experiences are really empowering and exciting and wonderful, and other times they're really shameful, even like more so because the character realizes that they're probably going to go back and have sex with this person again, even though it's a really like destructive, horrible like situation. And yeah, and a lot of these characters are almost have this like self-destructive sense, or at least this really low like self-esteem to them, that they don't value their bodies and their lives in the way that they ideally should, but also not feeling ashamed about that. And there's one story where a character goes to an STD clinic and he's sitting there in the waiting room and he's thinking, I could say I deserve better than this, but do I really? And yeah, and that sense that gives, that has such an ambivalent sense of their own self-value is really striking and original. But yeah, I just loved how these stories give such an honest sense of that experience and this real messy side of gay life, but also a really honest portrayal of gay bodies. Like it doesn't, like with a lot of gay fiction, you get these sort of idealized bodies, like especially when having like sexual scenes with each other, and it's so unrealistic. But in these stories, these men, they have bellies, they have scars, they have very differently sized genitals, and it shows that in a really honest way, an unashamed way, and how these men are still sexy and have very sexy experiences with each other, and so yeah, it's such a striking, enjoyable collection. I just like fell into these stories and like ate it all up and thought it was wonderful. And finally, I read the novel An Ordinary Wonder by Buki Papillon, which has this gorgeous cover to it. And this is a very different story about a character named Otto that is born in a fairly like privileged or like powerful family in Nigeria, and is born intersex, and Otto's parents raise her to be a boy, but Otto feels herself to be a girl on the inside, and so there's this real conflict in her experience growing up, the way she is raised, from how she feels herself to be. And she has a twin sister who has this very strong connection with, and but yeah, because Otto's parents are very like superstitious, I feel like Otto's condition is very shameful and needs to be covered up, and they just need to raise Otto as a boy. But yeah, as Otto gets older, the real conflict of this sense of being comes out, and so Otto goes away to school at one point, and then is able to discover herself through lots of trials and tribulations of who she really is. And it is such a powerful story in a way, and one like I've not read before, and I wasn't sure about a couple of things about this story, in that in some parts it shows in real graphic detail the physicality of Otto's body, and I was slightly worried about that, like not so much in that I like didn't want to see or know about that, but in that the showing this in a story, I think it can almost feel like voyeuristic or like intrusive in a way that which almost makes me slightly uncomfortable, but I think is done in a really compassionate and meaningful way, and one that needs to be confronted when looking at this subject matter. But also later on in the novel, there's a part which almost becomes like too high drama, in a way that almost started to feel like the author like forcing the plot in a way, but actually it then like it comes across in a way which I think is quite meaningful, or at least the consequences of that. And again, is an example of an individual that at first like almost like has to turn their back on their own family history because of like issues to do with rejection, very much like in Amrou's like memoir, but then learns to embrace their past and their history and their family, and sees that there were other complicated things going on in their family life to do with family secrets, but also imbalances in society and like structural prejudice that's taking on to do with like misogyny and these different levels of society that have an impact on the way that they are treated and the way these prejudices manifest in their lives. And so yeah, I thought that was such a striking thing about this novel, and yeah, it's a really beautiful, striking, powerful story, and very well written. So yeah, I was so moved by this novel, and thought it was a great experience. So those were all the books I read. Yeah, quite a lot of them. Sorry if I went on longer than I meant to, but yeah, I have lots and lots of thoughts about them. So if you've read any of these books, I'd love to know your reactions to them, or if you have any thoughts about what I've said about them, please let me know in the comments below, or if you're eager to read any of these now yourself. But also I'd love to know about great things you've read in June, or maybe the not so great things you read over the month of June, and we can have a chat about them in the comments below. But hope you're doing well, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.